Hey, everybody, and welcome. This is Bob, and we're going to talk today to Joe Domino. And believe it or not, not only does he do jazz and things like that, talk about jazz, but he has written a book of poetry called "The American Enigma Is You." And I've got him with me here today. And Joe, yeah, you held it up there. Good. I got him here with me today, and we're going to talk about this. So, this you have. I'm going to hide the title here for a second because you have poet, painter, podcaster, and radio host.
Yeah.
And that so yeah, is poet new to you?
Poet is kind of the way all of this started for me. I mean, when I really kind of started getting into the creative world, I mean, it all began when I was in college. I was a sports writer. I ran into some friends that were more inclined to the arts, which I'd never really been into. So between music and literature, I just found an avenue with poetry and started writing. So I've been really doing writing and artist for about 30 years. And it was just always a pipe dream. When I started, I thought, man, how cool would it be to have a book published, like an actual whole book, and it took a while, but it seems like it's the right time.
And also in your on the book here, I noticed at the end you have a thank you to the Ozark arts community. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Does it helped you along a little bit here?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would love to say about that is when this journey began, I reached out to one of my very good friends who I actually used to write with at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, in my early journalism days. His
Mm-hmm.
name is Kevin Rabus. He was the poet laureate of Kansas for, I believe, 3 years. He's a very good friend. We're still old school. We send each other letters like a lost art, but he is one of my dear friends. He's a jazz musician. He's a wonderful writer. He's a poet. So I asked him if he had any ideas of where I could get published. Excuse me. I'm having a little bit of, let me get a water real quick. I
Sure,
apologize.
go ahead.
Yeah.
This is all part of the poetry, folks. The poetry of life. You have
It's,
to have
it's, it,
water.
it's the improv. It's absolutely the improv. So I reached out to Kevin because I was really hot to trot to try to get my work published. And he had a friend who was at Spartan Press, and they ended up, this is their organization. So all of this is a collective, and what they do is they finance writers. So it's really one of those co-ops where it kind of feeds each other, the sales of these, putting out the good word, having people being cognizant of it. It's just kind of a collective goodwill to further the arts, and it's just such a wonderful thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and you can get more information at osageac.org, the Osage art community here. And in your book here, it talks about it's located on a 152-acre farm in rural central Missouri, and it's bordered by the Gasconade River. And it provides residency for those working alone as well as welcoming collaborative teams.
Yeah.
And offers living space and workspace out in the country so you can be inspired. So, and I don't know if folks are familiar with rural Missouri, but it is beautiful.
Yes.
I, and I've had, and I'm sure you have as well, the pleasure of traveling around a bit, and the state of Missouri, I think, is one of those forgotten gems because we people tend to go to Kansas City, St. Louis for if you think of Missouri, but rural Missouri is just absolutely fabulous and has all kinds of different landscapes too. So folks should check that out and see what else they have to offer there at osageac.org. So they're
Absolutely.
helping you kind of get your kind of a dream, really, right? So this was like something on your bucket list, as it were, to get something published. So how did you start this? What was the process that you were like, I need to get this done, and how did you get going with it?
I'm 52, so I never thought that I would get to this midlife point where I would start thinking about just all of these things that I hadn't accomplished in my life, and one of them was definitely getting a book out there. It had always been so. I've put chapbooks out on the streets of Kansas City, and I have some. There was a variety of coffee shops and even bookstores that would hold these, and I would get notes, and people would invite me. There's one individual that wrote a review on my book, Elena, she got one of my chapbooks, and we met up and had coffee, and she was an artist, and she invited me to a poetry reading, and it really, really reignited that love of poetry. And this was probably about 2 or 3 years ago. So I just had been kind of thinking about it, but it's such a big endeavor to get to the point where you actually take that thought and get it published. It was a long process, but I figured at this point in my life it was time to do it. I'd waited long enough, and I just felt like I was ready to do it. So it was just kind of about momentum and just looking at um, just things that I want to do with my life, and it just seemed like the right time to do it. So it was it was go time.
So you mentioned you were writing in University of Missouri, but you also were a sports journalist for a while too. Did
Yeah.
that have any influence on this aspect? I mean, you don't normally think of sports journalists and poetry in the
No.
same beat, but
Yeah. No.
what do you think about that? I mean, how did that carry across?
It's a weird anomaly, man. All of it, everything that I've decided to do doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But so my whole dream when I went to college was to be on the set of ESPN. I wanted to be on Sports Center. I wanted to be next to Dan Patrick, and I really, really went hard and charged after the dream. And I went to St. Louis at one point. First loan I ever took out was a $500 loan to go to the first annual sports broadcasting camp. And Joe Buck was going to be there, Bob Costas, Dan Deerdorf, all of these people. So I was gung ho and I was in it. So I got down there and everything went great. And and my dream just kept getting fueled and fueled. I ended up getting an internship at 61 Country, which was a radio station here in Kansas City, and they did pre and post game coverage of the Kansas City Royals, and that was a big dream. So I would go to the stadium, I would take phone calls, I would do all kind of the back end work of getting the production done, and I just got on the inside of the sports world, and it just wasn't my thing. I was like, I don't know if I want to spend my life doing this. They don't pay you that well. There's a lot of weird egos that go into the world of sports, not only with athletes, but especially with the broadcasting world. There's just this level of kings and queens on thrones and ego that I didn't want to deal with my life. I wanted to
Mhm.
be around people that were much more real and grounded. And I'm not trying to knock that world, but it just wasn't me. There's people out there that it totally works for. So long story short, during that time of me kind of coming to this crossroads and figuring out sports broadcasting wasn't my thing, and I was in the middle of college, I just really kind of switched courses, met some really good friends that showed me art and literature and poetry, and I just went into it, and it just felt right. And I've always said that poetry is kind of a poor man's therapy. It's a way getting all of your thoughts onto a page, because men, especially with our egos, we tend to tamp it down, and having an
Mhm.
outlet like writing and poetry was a way of kind of letting it all out and getting it out there. So really I just kind of transitioned from that dream of being in sports to getting into the more of like arts and culture and that kind of a thing. I still do love sports. I still watch them, and that dream was reignited with my son Miles. He loves sports, so I got back into it. So yeah, that's kind of how it all began.
It's kind of an interesting journey because I mean, you do a show called Neon Jazz that's on the broadcast terrestrial radio as well as internet radio or podcasting,
Yeah.
and and so you have that aspect of things, and then I know in your personal life, I mean, as far as like your day job, as it were, right? You are in IT, right?
Yes.
So I mean, you have this weird amalgam, if you will, because whenever people think of poetry books and so forth, they're not going, "Oh, the IT guy's writing a poetry book."
Right. That's right.
So I mean, how do you? I mean, obviously everybody is an individual, right? And we all take different journeys, but how do you, bring all that together with all these differences in your life? Because obviously, to me, there's an IT person's thought process is probably quite different than a poetry writer's process.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a level of linear thought that goes into the world of IT and zeros and ones, but I think it's just all about where I came from. So I never really thought that I was going to get in IT. I was working at a architectural engineering firm, a pretty big one called HNTB, and they hired me to do marketing database work. So I was building this big database for them in my mid 20s, trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And at that point, when I transitioned out of broadcasting, I got into marketing and graphic design and database things, and I saw the IT department there and how they rolled. And a lot of what I was doing in my personal life and the people that I were around was very IT driven. So I ended up leaving there, or maybe it was before that. I got a job as a desktop publisher at a home health consulting company. And at that time in the 90s, people may not understand with IT, companies just asked you to do things. You didn't have to have certifications. If you were alive and breathing and you could do it, they would say, "Hey, can you do the network? Can you do this?" So I just started doing it, and I really liked it, and it paid well. And I thought, this is stable, this is solid. I can get into it, and it just kind of steamrolled. I ended up kind of just going down that path. It's been a really good day job, and all of these other things that I do just lend to what I put into my poetry book. I mean, all of these different things all feed. It's like all these little tributaries lead to this ocean of creativity. And it's just always made sense to me. I've always had a day job. I've always been really good about having side gigs. And I think I've always felt more well rounded and just kind of connected to humanity and the arts by doing it this way.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. And I think more people need to think like you, right? So it's interesting that everybody is kind of has an all or nothing attitude, right? They're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I only want to be this." And
Yeah.
it's like, "No, that's not the way to live life.
Right.
You need to do you need to do all of your what you want to do, but unfortunately, you have to have a job
Yeah. Yeah.
that
You
pays
do.
the bills." And so I think that you're doing it the right way, and that are a really good example of showing that you can have many different facets. You don't have to just be, my joke about the IT guy writing poetry. You don't have to be. That's not the way it has to be. So
Exactly.
so we have the book, The American Enigma Is You, which oddly enough we're kind of talking about in a way with that, right? So you are a bit of an enigma because of the nature of all the things you're
True.
doing,
True.
right? And so
Yeah.
you're that title really is quite interesting on a lot of levels because it can describe you, it can describe somebody else, it can describe your some of your friends and acquaintances. I mean, it really does. Was there a particular reason you chose that title?
Whenever I write volumes, I have a whole lot that I've written over time and I bundle them up and I name them. And that was one of the more recent ones. There was about five or six the publisher was going for, but that one just seemed to make sense. And especially with the political environment we just went through, just how strange things are in America, just kind of the overall sentiment. It's like I sent all these titles over, and this one always kind of pulled on me. When I knew that I was going to put a collection together, this was the first title that popped into my head. But it's interesting that you bring that up because it's true about me too. I mean, it's like it's the ironic embodiment of who I am. So it actually makes sense. But I think it was more of kind of a statement on just, I'm at 52. I've seen this development of having three or four channels on a TV to being an IT guy and having this absolute plethora of anything that we want at any time with our technological streams that exist in 2024. So kind of going from that to now, I think about America and like, who are we? Like, we're so enigmatic. Like when you go out to a mall, or I'll take my son to a water park, I see everybody kind of wandering around, figuring it out, and I think we're all trying to identify with who we are as Americans because that's what we've always done. But it's like I think it's more ever present now. And I think the COVID time period kind of scrambled that up. I think we may have
Mhm.
had a beat on things. And then I think when that happened, I think that's why mental health and the awareness of everything is just kind of, exploded.
Yeah, yeah, no kid. Yeah, I think that the COVID years or a year and a half or so over what I can't remember the exact timing of it, but over a couple of years there during COVID, it really did change people's perspectives
Yeah.
quite a lot. And I think that, I think before that we were all go, go, go. I know I was, right. So we're all, and then afterward you're like, hey, wait a minute, maybe I want to do more things.
Yeah.
It gave us that moment to reflect. And I think a lot of people reflected and they're like, you know what, this isn't really going the way I want it to go.
Right.
And they took a turn. And so you're right, that's the American enigma at this point is because I think that people are really more I don't want to say so. There was a thing like when we were both younger that was called the me generation, right?
Yeah.
And it's not the me generation
Yeah.
anymore. Even though there is some inward thoughts and so forth, it's certainly not the me generation. The me generation is all about you gaining things. I think at this point we're kind of it's different. It's about me, but not in acquisition of things, but me as in how can I be a better person.
You're totally right. And I think about that Gen X thing because that's kind of where we come from.
Yeah.
We were kind of the first generation that tried to debunk that whole 50s mindset of collecting all these toys, having all this status, keeping up with the neighbors. We wanted to be the types that if we wanted to travel and save up and do it, that's what we're going to do. That's our big mortgage. That's our purpose, and
Hmm.
really kind of exploring and expanding on these notions that I think society wanted to suppress. Like, where are we from? Who are we? The big questions, the small questions. And then you take us into this pandemic where everybody hit the crossroads. And I'll go back to your earlier question about why did I decide to do it? Probably in a weird subconscious meeting the conscious with me, I decided probably at that point, we all got to this existential crossroads in our lives. And I think that's where I got like, I've been writing for a long time. People seem to like it. I go to readings and people dig it. Why not put out a book? And um, yeah, so I think it's just time. And I think a lot of people discover that. And that's what I discover. The amazing thing about interviewing people like you and everybody else that I've had the fortunate opportunity to interview, I love this diversity and variety of people that have just gotten to this point in their lives where they've decided to do things, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a book, whether it's traveling to this place, or whether it's becoming a digital nomad. There's just this incredible human spirit that we all embody that's anterior to what the media shows us. We all really are capable of anything that we want to do. And to me, it's like, why not? Why not try to get a book out? What's the worst that's going to happen? Maybe it'll take longer than I thought, or this publisher won't do it. But if you don't try, what did Mark Twain said? I think we said it in our first interview. Mark Twain at the end of his life said, I don't regret what I did. I regret what I
Hmm.
didn't do. And
Yeah.
that's an expensive notion.
Yeah, no kid, and we are. If you think about it, not to toot the Gen X horn here again, but we are doing things. So podcasting is a result of people saying, "Why can't I do this?" Even though it's not going to be my full time job,
Right.
right? Why can't I do? Why can't I write? Why can't I put out a book? Why can't I have a show? Why can't I? Do television and so forth, and that's what the explosion of all this stuff on the internet is a result of people saying I can do some of that if I
Yeah.
want to,
Yeah.
and we're all doing it. And I think that's really interesting that it really does kind of fit that model of not tying yourself to say I'm only an accountant and that's all I'm ever going to be,
Yeah.
and you get so identify with your means of support that you can't tear away from it and be something else.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you, as I was reading some of the poetry here and so forth, did you have a poet or poets that were kind of influences on you?
I went through a big Charles Bukowski phase, and I think when people like him, you get totally strung out. And I realized I got way, way too deep, and I had to diversify. But I love Bukowski. I love beat poets, Ezra Pound. I love Cummings, the way that he would kind of play with letters and sketch
Hmm.
around and do those things. I mean, but I also like the traditional stuff like Robert Frost and those cats. But it's always, to me, it's always kind of the blue collar people out there that you don't know about. Like when I go to these poetry readings and I hear people, but I will tell you the one that's always on top of my list that I absolutely love, that's just a titan of the economy of words and thoughts and just the way they roll is Billy Collins. He is
Hmm.
one of those guys where I literally have to take a minute and just lean back every couple pages, because the way he orchestrates and constructs and puts things together is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and you said E. Cummings, and that's what came to mind just initially. And I was hoping you were going to say that because there was so much E. Cummings esque things in here as I'm just on the visual side of things, let alone reading things, because of the lowercase, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of lowercase, a lot of playing with the spacing of your words and so forth. That immediately when I was just looking at the page, I'm like, that looks like, reminds me of E. Cummings,
Yeah.
which I love E. Cummings, by the way. So that maybe the other thing was because I'm so enamored with E. Cummings, but I was like, that's so interesting. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you said that because now I felt like, well, maybe he doesn't like E. Cummings, and I'm going to say this, and he's going to be like, well, what the heck would you say that for? But no, I'm glad you mentioned it.
I'm so glad that you asked me this, because I didn't even think about that. And that's kind of how I create. I come from like a real cerebral place. Sometimes I think my subconscious acts as my conscious mind, because I've always loved the way that that flows, and just the way that you can use lines and words, and the way that you space it out. You can use that to compound the meaning of what you're going for. But I've always
Mhm.
kind of been like that. People are like, were you going for that? And I'm like, no, not really. I mean, I kind of get in this vacuum, this incubator, when I create and I do things. And sometimes I'm just not aware of what's going on the outside world. And I think for some people that create, whether it's art or broadcast or podcast, you're just doing your thing. Like, your approach to what you're doing is 100% unique. I've never seen it before. And it just adds to how good you are at what you do, which is why I really wanted you to talk to me about the book, because there's so much that's unique about what you do.
You also incorporated some of your sports things here. So the early morning man talks about the Royals in your
Yeah.
in your thing. So it's interesting that you're bringing all aspects of your life into this as you're creating, which I think is the way that people should do it. I think a lot of people try to narrow themselves to be something or another thing and eliminate parts of themselves because they think that's the style, right? That's what you have to do. But no, you bring everything in. Do you have, if you had to pick one of your poems here, did you have a favorite?
I really like the fact that I got to write about my kids and my wife. Like, the one about my wife that's constantly getting serenaded by the neighborhood white-throated sparrow. Things like that are awesome. When you can galvanize and immortalize these little moments that people tend to forget, it's always fun. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just really about, yeah, even with the early morning man, like the 2015, that was such a big thing for Kansas City. And, St.
Mhm.
Louis has had a long history too of having successful winning teams. When you get swept up into that, there's a democratization that makes sense to me about that. Everybody comes together. We feel good. We're going after one thing. There's no political dividing line. We're just feeling good. And the idea of this is that 2015 era has gone away. All the stickers are fading. All of the license plate covers are fading to a point where you're like, wait, is that? Oh yeah, that's when we won it. So we're just kind of going through all of that. But I think overall, there's about three or four of these that I got published in journals, and then the rest of them are kind of what I've called over the last few years. And yeah, it's fun. Like, even the one in here. Um, has a special place in my heart. When the pandemic happened and we were all going through this time of figuring everything out, I was driving a lot. I was an essential worker in IT, so I was really cleaning all these devices in the school district. But I would also get the kids out, and I ramped up my jazz interviews. So I would be interviewing musicians on speaker or in the car, and they would listen to it. And I'd always go by this one pizza place off the highway, and it's never changed since 2020. And
Mhm.
there is a sign up there, and I'll read it real quick. It's
Yeah.
every day I drive by the Funhouse Pizza. There's a sign saying "See you in heaven, Audrey." And now I'm certain she is a carnival saint, sprinkling the good times right down into our hungry brains like magic Parmesan cheese. Those, when
Yeah.
when you go by these places every day and you see these things that people just kind of dismiss, or maybe people are like, who was that girl? Or when are they going to ever change the sign? They may never change it. In fact,
Right.
I might go in there and say, hey, I want to see the owner and I want to show him that poem. I think I'm going to do that this weekend.
Yeah. No, that's great. And it's interesting that that they would have. I mean, you're getting insight into that place and the people who work there and so forth. That they, they're still a functioning business, right? But they still have kept the sign
They
the
kept it.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think she made such an impact. They don't want to get rid of it because they've changed. Like there's a front and back part, and
Right.
the back part is where it's at, and it's never changed since 2020. But the front
Right.
part changes all the time. So
Right. Well, everything marches on, but it's interesting that they keep that going as well.
yeah,
It's I like it. So you have a style that I would say is not traditional poetry writing, right? You're not worried about rhyming. You're not doing iambic pentameter or anything like that. So
yeah,
you're doing your own thing, and that again, that to me, hits with Cummings, but I like it because it's so free flowing, right? So when you read that, uh, it really was the same way that I read it
yeah,
in whenever I was going through it, and I think that has to do with the spacing and some other things, but and the punctuation a little bit, but it's not totally there, right? So it's up for interpretation, but it it come close to what I was doing. Is that just happenstance, you think, or what's your thoughts on that?
yeah. I mean, I think it's a level of its like stream of consciousness. There's people when I asked people to like send me blurbs to review, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them said that it was very jazzish, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I've always been free flowing, but I think the more I've gotten into doing my show, which has been going on since 2011, I've learned so much from these musicians about improv and feeling it and cerebrally kind of going in, like in a visceral way. And I think that's kind of how it works. Like when I sent all of this over, I think every new line had like an uppercase, and the publisher was like, "Do you really need it to be like that? Because it seems
Mm-hmm.
distracting." And I'm like, "No, we can change it." Now, when I was in college, if someone would have asked me to do changes like that, I'm like, "No, that's the way I meant it to be." Like the older I've got, I'm like, I'm a little bit more open and free because at the end of the day, you're going to get the idea. And I think having it lowercase and being a little bit free flowing is kind of the way life is. Like when you walk out into the world and you see how things operate and a leaf floats down and hits the ground or a loose dog's running around, you're like, what the hell's going on? There's all of these random things that happen that don't need to be capitalized, don't need to be punctuated perfectly. It's just kind of this poetry of being alive on the planet. And there's not really any fences or parameters. And to quote my one of my Charles Bukowski, one of my favorite poets, he said that we're born geniuses and buried idiots. So I spend my life trying to like protect my wonder and wander. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that just kind of becomes a part of my creative process.
That's a great quote, by the way. That's
So
a great
great.
quote. I would totally agree with that. And you look at the innocence of a child, and there is a genius there, no matter what.
Yeah.
And yeah, as we get older, we get jaded, and we get forced into the rules that we probably don't like
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, so I was going to ask you, and you've already kind of answered it a little bit. Does the jazz, your interest in jazz, play a part in your writing? And obviously, it did, because of the nature of what you just mentioned with the free flowing aspect and kind of incorporating that kind of style for lyrics and so forth down into your poetry writing, which obviously, lyrics and poetry are, kind of two sides of the same coin in some regards. But would you say that was there anything negative about all of your jazz knowledge that came into this at all?
No, I think it just enhances it. In fact, what I do, and I haven't published this. Well, I have. I do have a couple of books on Amazon, and one of them is called Jazz Haiku. What I'll do with interviews, so when I interview musicians, I'll go through and find quotes and timestamp them.
Mhm.
and I do it in like a note on my phone. So I'll take all of those thoughts or all of those like timestamp quotes from musicians, and on the side I'll write haikus because I really want to get to the economy of words, but I really dig into their worlds and try to be creative and maximize my words. And I think that's been kind of a part of me doing more long form poetry. But
Mhm.
I just think overall there's a level that I've learned from jazz musicians about kind of the magnitude of creativity, but the fact that it can just kind of escape into the ether and everything's new every single time they get on the bandstand. And I've kind of tried to harness that notion, probably more subconscious than anything else in the way that I create and the way that I write. It's just I've kind of emulated um, the imperfect perfection of what they do as creators.
So is there, and that, I mean, that's fantastic. And I love the haiku thing. A long time ago, I did movie haikus where I tried to describe movies as a haiku,
Yeah,
just for fun. I did that for a little bit online, but I think it was called Haiku Movie Review. But
yeah,
anyway,
that's awesome. What a great idea, dude. Great idea.
but anyway, so I don't know why I do this. Maybe it's the statistical nature of myself. So you got 21 pages of poems, essentially, right? Is there any significance to that?
Well, he wanted a 40-page manuscript. So I really had to trim it down. I had like probably 80, 90 going in, and I really had to trim it down. I think it's just a level of probably just some kind of inside publishing thing, I'm thinking. And maybe it's you don't want to get people lost, and it's my first time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if this happens again, which I would love to, it can be bigger. I think once you gain traction, maybe that's kind of a inside poetry kind of secret where it's small. I know with Kevin, who I've read all of his books and I love his poetry, his tend to be rather short and sweet. And
Mm-hmm.
personally, I kind of like it. Kind of like that, I know um, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but I think it's enough. I think you can go through this in one sitting or a few and really feel good about it and maybe go back to it. It's not too laborious. It's kind of I don't know. It's kind of like meeting a friend after work for a drink. You don't have to go and completely get absolutely out of your head. You just have a couple drinks, you swim around in this nirvana for a little bit, and you have a good memory when you walk away. You're like, man, that was a good time. And that's the way I kind of want this book to be. Just like a good meeting up with an old friend, have a drink, get a little light in the head and feel good about being alive on this planet. I think that's kind of the notion, and having it being kind of short like that makes sense.
So for your next one, are you going to do kind of like a concept album version of poetry?
That would be cool, man. That would be totally cool. I haven't really gotten to that point. I'm just curious to see where this is going to go. Um, so yeah, I mean, we all are our own worst critic. We just we're the hardest on ourselves. So I'm not quite sure where I'm at with the reality. I'm still just absorbing the fact that this happened because I think it was released on October 28th. So
Mhm.
it's been a little over a month or so, and it's just still weird to have a book and mailing it to friends. I've had people that are buying it, giving me feedback, very excited about it. Even signing a book is weird, like autographing something. It's like,
Yeah,
I mean, when I was a kid, I used to autograph old like the common baseball cards just because I thought I might be a baseball player and I want to get my autograph down.
sure.
But I never thought I would do it in any kind of real form. So all of it's just fun right now. So if I get to the point where another one happens, I got plenty of material. I got all kinds of words.
Oh, that's interesting. The other thing is, as I'm looking at it, is I think that a lot of these, and I always find it interesting to, take things into other formats. So I think it would be interesting. Uh, Not that I'm not trying to give you work here, but anyway, I just find it interesting. So, if you when you read the poems, if you'd add some visuals, and then these could be, just short little videos with visuals added to them. I think that a lot of them are incredibly visual when you read them, and it would not that you want to take away from the reading aspect of it for your own imagination, but I think it also could be interesting to see what you come up with when you put it together because it's so free flowing and so forth. It would be, I think, a very interesting experimental visuals that could happen with these words. But I don't know. That's just an idea that popped into my head as I was reading through stuff. I was like, wow, that would be kind of neat if you could put that out there in another format as well, because it is, it's it's a little bit different in the sense that people always think of things more linearly, and these definitely don't have necessarily a linear pattern to all of
Yeah.
them. And I think that would be interesting as well. So if folks want to get your book, where can they find it at?
They can go to joedomino.com,
Hey,
and
look, it's on the screen too.
yeah, it's right there on the front page. And then it's on barnesandnoble.com, and it's on amazon.com. So if you just search whether it's Joe Domino poetry book, or go to my website, and one of these vendors, you can just go and put my name in, and it'll come right up for you.
So now, I mean, next thing you have to do is you have to, I mean, obviously you could write some more,
Yeah.
but, maybe you set it to music. Maybe you set it to, to visuals.
It's interesting that you say that. One of my best friends, one of the coolest people that are on this planet that I'm fortunate to call a friend. He's a local musician named E.E. Pointer. He was an educator for a long time. He's the leader of a band called the River Cow Orchestra, and they do a lot of there's a place called the Westport Coffee House here in Kansas City, and they'll have poets and they'll play behind them, and it's a really cool night of improv. But he actually one morning, I gotta get another sip. Man, it's this weather. It's like I'm just getting dry in the throat, which
I
isn't
understand.
good. Excuse me. So one morning I woke up. This was one of the coolest things, and it was probably one of the reasons why I really went after trying to publish this. He got on my website and was reading through my work and found a poem about this little old guy that comes in with his wife and I have the poem in the book too. He goes down to this place called the Blue Room, which is famous on 18th and Vine, and there's these Thursday at noon series, and he's kind of slouched, he's slunched over, he's very old, but he's always like wagging his head and going to the music, and he feels it. And it's like the moment of perfection for him. After all this time, jazz is the healer. And I wrote a poem about it, and E.E. actually put it to music and blew me away. And I've taken his works and I've put stuff to it. So yeah, we've talked about collaborating, and that's been a part of it. And years ago, it's funny you mentioned visuals. I did visuals with some of my poetry and had it on. I have a YouTube poetry channel, and I haven't really kept up with it. It's been a long time, but that's a great idea. I would love to have that be a companion. So I'm glad that you said something about it.
Yeah, and because I just think it all kind of lends itself, and it's just another. I mean, we are in an age of actually don't even call it multimedia anymore, but we are in an age of multiple outlets of media, and so it's interesting that you can do some of these literally could just be Twitter posts or X posts or Instagram, and be put out there for folks to peruse, and getting it out into the world. Well, and that's what everybody kind of needs. You always need to take a break, and these are kind of the perfect thing to take a break and disappear into this world with the poetry, and wonder who's Audrey, right? And why do we miss her so much, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it totally is. Yeah.
And so thanks, Joe, for being on here and talking to me about your book. Again, you can find it at Joe Domino. Here we go. Good stuff. Somebody's put on here in our chat right here. And pick it up. And it's a nice book of poetry written by a solid Midwesterner, as I will say, because I think that the Midwest has a lot to offer, and a lot of folks don't. A lot of folks nationally always think it's on the coast, but you know what? The reason you were in St. Louis for the sports broadcasters thing, is because they all came from this area.
Absolutely, they did. Yeah. And that is an interesting point. My favorite broadcaster of all time, who I got to tell you is Bob Costas. And when I was at that, broadcasting camp, all I did the whole time he talked is I wrote down words that I didn't know or I'd never really heard before used that
Mhm.
way. And I filled up a legal pad and I've been trying to find it for years and I can't find it anywhere. But anyway, it just pays the homage to the fact that, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, Walter Cronkite, um,
Yeah.
the college that the Chiefs practice at, Missouri Western, they have a whole
Mhm.
wing called the Walter Cronkite wing. So yeah, it's there's a lot of people that come from here.
Oh yeah, all of the great hosts and podcast or I say podcast broadcasters. I say podcasters because you and I are in the Midwest, but
Yeah,
broadcasters come from the Midwest, and it's just astounding. Tom Brokaw went to the J School in Columbia, right? And Bob Costas in St. Louis, and Joe Buck and Jack Buck and Harry Carey was voice of the
yeah,
Cardinals before he was the voice of the Cubs,
absolutely.
and everything. It's just amazing. And now Joe Domino,
We're
the
here.
voice of poetry, free flowing jazz style poetry,
Yes, sir.
right here, and you can get it at joedomino.com. The American Enigma Is You. Thanks, Joe, again. Great
Bob.
talking to you, and all the best.
Yes, Bob. Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir. It's been an honor. Thank you for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.